The North Atlantic does not care about the price tag of a fifth-generation fighter jet. It is 0300 hours, somewhere south of the Arctic Circle, and the ocean is a chaotic black void. Winds are gusting past 60 knots, whipping freezing spray across the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford. The ship, 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered diplomacy, is not gliding. It is heaving. The bow plunges into a 30-foot trough, burying itself in green water before shuddering upward, shedding thousands of tons of ocean in a violent cascade. On the flight deck, an F-35C Lightning II, an asset worth over $100 million, sits exposed to the fury. It is not in a hangar. It is chained to the steel. As the deck lists 20 degrees to port, the aircraft's landing gear struts compress, groaning under the shifting gravity. The heavy steel tie-down chains snap taut, vibrating like guitar strings. If just one link fails, 20 tons of lethal technology will slide across the non-skid surface and vanish into the dark water below. But the jet does not move. This is not a gamble against nature. It is a calculated masterclass in survival. To understand why a billion-dollar air wing is left exposed to a hurricane-force gale, one must first understand the fundamental doctrine of modern naval supremacy. The aircraft carrier is not merely a ship. It is a sovereign instrument of national power. It is 4.5 acres of American territory that can move 500 miles in a single day. But the ship itself, the nuclear reactors, the steel hull, the radar towers, is only the delivery system. The true weapon is the carrier air wing. Sitting on the flight deck and tucked into the hangar bay are roughly 75 aircraft. There are 4 squadrons of strike fighters, typically FA-18 Super Hornets, or the newer F-35C Lightning IIs. There are electronic attack aircraft, the EA-18G Growlers, designed to blind enemy radar. There are E-2D Hawkeyes, the flying command centers distinguished by their massive rotating radar domes, and a complement of Seahawk helicopters for anti-submarine warfare and search and rescue. Collectively, this hardware represents an investment exceeding $6 billion. More importantly, it represents a strategic capability that cannot be replicated by land-based airfields. A land base is static. Its coordinates are known, its runways are fixed targets, and it is subject to the diplomatic whims of host nations. The carrier is elusive and autonomous. However, this autonomy comes with a non-negotiable price. The carrier must live in the environment it seeks to dominate. Unlike coastal defense navies, which can retreat to the safety of a breakwater when the barometer drops, a blue water navy operates in the deep ocean, often thousands of miles from the nearest friendly port. In the Pacific, this means navigating the Typhoon Alley that stretches from the Philippines to Japan. In the Atlantic and Mediterranean, it means facing the vicious winter storms that churn up the waters of the northern hemisphere. Warfare does not pause for weather. An adversary looking to move a fleet, invade an island, or close a shipping lane will often choose the cover of a storm to mask their movements. Betting that satellite surveillance will be blinded by cloud cover and that carrier operations will be suspended. Therefore, the carrier cannot simply run away. To maintain deterrence, the carrier strike group must remain on station. They must ride out the storm. This creates a conflict between geology and engineering. The ocean is a dynamic system of immense energy. When wind blows across the surface of the open water over a long distance, a distance oceanographers call the fetch, kinetic energy is transferred from the atmosphere to the sea. In the vast expanse of the Pacific, the fetch can be thousands of miles long. By the time a storm system matures, it creates a chaotic topography of water. We measure this violence using the World Meteorological Organization's sea state code. Sea state 0 is a mirror-calm surface. Sea state 4 involves moderate waves of 4 to 8 feet, where whitecaps become numerous. This is standard operating weather. But when a low-pressure system deepens, conditions deteriorate rapidly into sea state 6 and 7. Here, wave heights range from 13 to 20 feet and higher. The ocean surface becomes a series of moving hills and valleys. For a small destroyer or frigate, these conditions are miserable, turning the ship into a pendulum that rolls violently from side to side. For an aircraft carrier, the physics are different, but the danger is no less acute. The carrier is a high-value target, not just for enemy missiles, but for the physics of momentum. The flight deck is located 60 feet above the waterline. This height is necessary for flight operations, but it amplifies the motion of the ship. A roll of just a few degrees at the waterline translates to a massive lateral swing at the flight deck level. If the ship rolls 10 degrees to starboard, the wingtip of a parked jet on the flight deck might travel a vertical distance of 20 feet in seconds. This creates significant G-forces acting sideways on the aircraft. A 20-ton fighter jet suddenly wants to slide. Its tires, designed to absorb the shock of landing, offer little resistance to lateral sliding on a wet, oily steel deck. The friction coefficient of the non-skid surface, a rough sandpaper-like coating applied to the steel, is high, but it is not infinite. When covered in sea spray, hydraulic fluid, and jet fuel, the deck becomes slick. Without intervention, a storm would clear the deck of aircraft as efficiently as a broom sweeping dust. The jets would simply slide over the edge and into the sea. The survival of the air wing, therefore, depends on denying the laws of physics. It requires a seamless integration of heavy engineering and brutal manual labor. The ship must be stable enough to prevent catastrophic rolls, but when the ocean inevitably wins the contest of force, the aircraft must be secured to the deck with absolute rigidity. This is not a passive activity. It is a constant, dynamic battle against the sea, waged by the ship's hull form and its propulsion systems. The engineering marvel of a supercarrier lies in its ability to defy the chaotic motion of the sea. A Nimitz or Ford-class carrier is designed with a very specific hydrostatic profile. The hull is roughly 1,092 feet long, displacing 100,000 tons of water. But unlike a cruise ship, which sits high and boxy above the water to maximize cabin views, a carrier is built for density and stability. The ship's center of gravity is carefully managed. The heavy nuclear reactors, the fuel bunkers containing millions of gallons of JP5 jet fuel, and the magazines storing thousands of tons of ordnance are located deep within the hull, well below the waterline. This low center of gravity acts as a pendulum weight, naturally fighting the roll of the waves and forcing the ship back to a vertical position. However, passive stability is not enough when facing 30-foot swells. To actively combat the ocean, the carrier utilizes a sophisticated steering and stabilization system. Protruding from the hull beneath the waterline are massive steel fins, known as active stabilizers. These fins work like the ailerons on an aircraft wing. As sensors detect the beginning of a roll to the left, the ship's computer automatically angles the fins to generate lift on that side, counteracting the motion. Simultaneously, The quartermaster of the watch and the officer of the deck on the bridge are constantly monitoring the wave patterns. In severe weather, they will alter the ship's heading to minimize the impact of the swell. Taking a heavy sea on the beam directly from the side is the most dangerous position, causing maximum roll. Instead, the ship will steer into the waves at a 45-degree angle, allowing the sharp bow to cut through the water rather than being slapped sideways by it. Yet, even with nuclear propulsion and active stabilization, the math of the pack is unforgiving. A common misconception is that when a storm hits, the crew simply lowers all the aircraft on the elevators and parks them safely inside the hangar bay. This is physically impossible. The hangar bay of a US supercarrier is enormous, spanning 2/3 of the ship's length, but it is also finite. It serves as the maintenance garage, the gym, and the cargo hold. At maximum capacity, the hangar can safely stow perhaps 40 to 50% of the air wing. The rest, 30 to 40 aircraft worth billions of dollars, must remain on the flight deck, regardless of the weather. This reality transforms the flight deck from an airfield into a high-stakes puzzle. When a storm approaches, the handler, the officer in charge of flight deck arrangement, must execute a heavy weather tie-down. This is not a suggestion. It is a mandatory reconfiguration of the ship's lethality. Aircraft are not just parked. They are spotted in specific defensive formations. They are clustered tightly together behind the island superstructure to shield them from the wind and breaking waves. The engines are covered with heavy intake plugs to prevent saltwater ingestion. The canopies are locked, and the responsibility for their safety shifts from the nuclear engineers below decks to the teenagers in color-coded jerseys working in the gale above. The ship can only do so much. Eventually, the safety of the fleet comes down to the strength of a steel chain and the hands that secure it. The defense of the air wing begins in a windowless room just off the flight deck, known as flight deck control. Here, the battle against the storm is fought not with microchips, but with plastic and wood. In the center of the room sits the Ouija board, a 6-foot-long, waist-high scale model of the carrier's flight deck and hangars. It is cluttered with small, flat plastic templates, each cut to the shape of an aircraft. A tiny F-18 template represents a real $50 million jet. A distinct tack stuck through the plastic indicates its fuel load, maintenance status, and armament. Despite the ship's advanced digital networks, the Ouija board remains the primary tool for deck management. It is immune to power outages, software crashes, and hacking. Standing over it is the handler, usually a lieutenant commander who has spent a career mastering the geometry of the deck. When the meteorological report confirms an approaching front with winds exceeding 40 knots, the handler makes the call that shifts the entire rhythm of the ship. Heavy weather tie down. On a calm day, a parked jet is secured with a standard tie-down configuration, usually 6 chains. This is enough to hold the aircraft against the ship's vibration and mild turns. But in a storm, 6 chains are a recipe for disaster. The order goes out over the 5MC, the flight deck public address system. The response is immediate. Swarming out of the catwalks come the aviation boatswain's mates, distinguished by their blue jerseys and float coats. These are the blue shirts. They are often the youngest sailors on the ship, some only months out of boot camp. Yet the physical security of the entire air wing rests in their hands. Their weapon is the TD-1B tie-down chain assembly. It is a simple, brutal piece of engineering. A length of high-strength steel chain with a heavy hook at one end and an adjustable tensioner at the other. It weighs roughly 12 pounds. Carrying one is manageable. Carrying them for 4 hours, sprinting between aircraft while the deck pitches 10 degrees, is an exhausting feat of endurance. The flight deck is perforated with thousands of star-shaped indentations called pad eyes. These are the anchor points welded directly into the ship's steel frame. The aircraft, conversely, have specific attachment points on their landing gear struts and fuselage called gripes. To secure a jet for a Sea State 7 storm, the blue shirts must create a web of steel. They don't just add more chains, they build a geometric cage. A heavy weather tie-down requires anywhere from 12 to 18 chains per aircraft, depending on the model and its position on the deck. For the E-2D Hawkeye, with its massive wingspan and high center of gravity, the requirement can go up to 20 chains. The process is violent and precise. A blue shirt slams the hook into a deck pad eye, drags the chain up to the aircraft's gripe, and locks it in. Then comes the tensioning. Using the adjustable turnbuckle, they crank the chain taut. It cannot be slightly loose. If there is any slack, the momentum of the rolling ship will allow the aircraft to jerk against the chain. That sudden shock load, the snatch, can snap a steel link instantly. Once a chain snaps, the load transfers unevenly to the remaining chains, causing a domino effect of failure. Conversely, they cannot over-tighten. If the chains are ratcheted down with too much hydraulic-like force, they can compress the aircraft's suspension struts to their limit. When the ship hits a wave and heaves upward, the G-force pushes the jet down further. If the strut has no room to compress, the energy goes into the airframe itself, cracking bulkheads or snapping landing gear. The blue shirts work in teams, moving from the bow to the fantail. They cross-chain the aircraft, hooking the left strut to a right side pad eye and vice versa to prevent lateral sliding. They install locks on the tail hooks. They place heavy rubber chocks around the wheels. It is a loud, dangerous ballet. The wind screams over the flight deck edge, often carrying stinging rain or sleet. The non-skid deck tears at knuckles and knees. There is no shelter. A blue shirt lying under the belly of an F-35 to secure a centerline chain is in a position of extreme vulnerability. If the jet slides even 6 inches, it will crush them. Yet, they move with practiced speed. Within an hour, the 40 aircraft on deck are anchored by over 600 separate steel chains, transforming the independent machines into a single rigid extension of the ship's hull. While the blue shirts fight the friction of the deck, a different kind of calculation is happening 10 decks below the waterline and 7 decks above it. High in the ship's island superstructure, in the primary flight control tower, known simply as Pry Fly, the air boss and the commander of the air group, the KAGSH, are staring at the same angry ocean. But they see different things. The air boss sees a logistical nightmare. The KAG sees a probability curve of survival. In naval aviation, weather is categorized by cases. Case 1 is a clear day, high ceiling, good visibility. Case 2 is overcast but manageable. Case 3 is the danger zone, night operations or weather conditions where the ceiling drops below 1,000 feet and visibility is less than 5 miles. The storm currently battering the hull is pushing conditions well beyond standard Case 3 parameters. The KAG, an elite pilot responsible for every aviator in the wing, must weigh the operational necessity. In peacetime training, the decision is easy. Cancel the sortie, secure the jets, and wait it out. The risk to $100 million airframe and a human life outweighs the value of a training flight. But in a combat deployment, or when a flight is already airborne and fuel is burning down, the calculus shifts. There is no alternate airfield in the middle of the Atlantic. The carrier is the only game in town. The CAG looks at the pitch and roll indicators on the pry-fly monitors. The limits for recovery are strict. Generally, if the deck is pitching, moving bow to stern more than 3 degrees, or rolling side to side more than 5 degrees, landing becomes exponentially more dangerous. To keep the deck within those limits, the ship relies on the snipe, the engineers deep in the bowels of the vessel. Beneath the waterline, the carrier is fighting a hydraulic war against the ocean. The active fin stabilizers are massive steel wings extending from the hull. They are controlled by gyroscopic sensors that detect the ship's motion milliseconds before the crew feels it. If the ocean tries to roll the ship to starboard, the hydraulic rams drive the starboard fin downward and the port fin upward, generating lift that forces the hull back to level. It is a violent, groaning application of torque that consumes massive amounts of power, but it can dampen a heavy roll by up to 50%. However, technology has limits. In a sea state 7, the stabilizers can be overwhelmed. The ocean is simply too strong. This is where seamanship takes over. The officer of the deck must steer a course that finds the sweet spot in the wave train. They cannot sail directly parallel to the swells, which causes maximum roll, or directly into them, which causes maximum pitching and slamming. They must quarter the seas, taking the waves at an angle that balances the motion. It is a delicate negotiation. A bad turn by the helmsman can induce a sudden violent lurch, a heavy roll that can send breakfast trays sliding in the mess hall, and more critically, strain those tie-down chains on the roof to their breaking point. But the real crisis emerges when the timing is wrong. The storm has intensified faster than predicted. The blue shirts have secured the parked jets. The stabilizers are fighting the roll. But there is still one problem. A flight of 2 FA-18 Super Hornets is still airborne. They launched 2 hours ago, before the squall line hit. Now they are low on fuel, and they have to come home to a deck that is moving like a bucking bronco. It is 2100 hours. The world outside the cockpit of the lead FA-18 Super Hornet is a swirling grey void. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander Miller, cannot see the ocean. He cannot see the horizon. He cannot even see the wingman flying in formation less than a mile away. The rain is hammering the canopy with such force it sounds like gravel. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere is claustrophobic. The only reality is the glowing green symbology of the heads-up display. Miller checks his fuel state. 2.8, 2,800 pounds remaining. In a car, that is a full tank. In a fighter jet maneuvering at low altitude, it is roughly 20 minutes of flight time. He is at bingo fuel, the absolute minimum required to return to the ship. There is no tanker available. The weather is too rough for an aerial refueling rendezvous. There is no diversion airfield. The nearest land is Newfoundland, 600 miles to the northwest. He has to land on the fort, and he has to do it now. On the carrier, the mood in Pry Fly has shifted from management to tension. The ship is pitching violently. The bow rises, pauses, and then slams down, sending a shudder through the entire steel frame. The landing signal officers, the paddles, are standing on their exposed platform at the aft port corner of the flight deck. They are protected only by a small windbreak, The wind is gusting 45 knots over the deck, tearing at their float coats. They are screaming into their radio handsets just to be heard over the gale. Their job is to talk Miller down. They hold the pickle switch, a trigger that controls the cut lights on the optical landing system, the meatball. If the deck moves too violently, or if Miller's approach is unsafe, they will hit the switch, flashing red lights that command an immediate wave off. Abort the landing, apply full power, and go around. But with Miller's fuel state dropping, a wave off is a dangerous luxury. Every go-around burns precious hundreds of pounds of fuel. He might only have 2 attempts before his engines flame out. 99 forward. Case 3 recovery. Altimeter 29.88. Deck is pitching ±4. Rolling ±2. Wind 330 at 45. Miller acknowledges. He drops his landing gear. The drag hits the jet, slowing it down. He lowers the hook. He is now committed. He enters the groove, the final 3/4 of a mile behind the ship. Normally, the automatic carrier landing system could guide the jet in, linking the ship's radar directly to the plane's autopilot. But in heavy seas, the deck motion confuses the computer. The data lag is fatal. The system tries to chase the deck, causing the jet to oscillate wildly. Miller has to fly this manually. He breaks out of the cloud layer at 600 feet. The rain is blinding. Through the smear of water on his canopy, he sees it. The faint amber light of the meatball and the runway lights outlining the landing area. But the runway isn't sitting still. It is heaving. From Miller's perspective, the landing area is a moving target that is rising and falling 20 feet every 10 seconds. He has to time his descent to meet the deck as it falls, but not so fast that he slams into the stern. Hornet 401, call ball. The LSO's voice cuts through the static. 401, Hornet ball, 2.6, Miller replies. He sees the glide slope indicator. He spots the deck. He reports his fuel state. He is 5 seconds from touchdown. The burble, the turbulent air wake created by the ship's massive island superstructure, hits him. The jet drops suddenly. Miller jams the throttle forward to catch the sink rate, but the deck is coming up fast. The ship's stern rises on a massive swell, turning the landing area into a steel wall rising to meet him. The LSO screams, "Power! Power! Power!" Miller slams the throttles to the firewall. The engines roar, spooling up to full military power instantly. This is the counterintuitive discipline of carrier aviation. You do not slow down to land. You land at full power in case you miss the wire. But Miller doesn't miss. The Hornet's main landing gear impacts the steel deck with a violence that would snap the axles of a commercial airliner. The shock absorbers compress fully, bottoming out with a sickening metallic clank. The jet, weighing 33,000 pounds, is traveling at 150 miles per hour. A split second later, the tail hook, a solid bar of high-strength alloy dragging behind the jet, scrapes across the deck, throwing up a shower of orange sparks. It skips over the 1 wire. It skips over the 2 wire. Then it bites. The hook snags the number 3 cross-deck pendant, a braided steel cable 1.5 inches thick. The impact is immediate and brutal. The wire pulls taut, ripping it out of its deck supports. Below decks, the arresting gear engine, a massive hydraulic piston system, screams as it absorbs the kinetic energy. Miller is thrown forward against his harness straps with 4 Gs of deceleration. His vision blurs. The jet shudders as the wire wrestles it to a dead stop in less than 300 feet. The engines are still howling at full power, trying to tear the aircraft loose, but the wire holds. Trapped. 401, the LSO confirms. Miller chops the throttles to idle. The roar dies down to a whine. But the danger isn't over. The ship takes a massive roll to port. The wire goes slack. The jet, now unpowered and unsecured, starts to slide backward on the wet, oily steel. Chocks, chocks, chocks. A team of blue shirts sprints out from the catwalks, heads down against the gale. They are risking their lives, running toward a moving jet with spinning turbine blades. They dive under the wings. They throw heavy rubber chocks in front of the wheels. Two others scramble with chains, hooking the landing gear to the deck pad, eyes before the ship rolls back to starboard. Within 30 seconds, the fighter is chained down. Miller opens the canopy, the freezing rain instantly soaking his flight suit. He climbs out, his legs shaking from the adrenaline dump. He has survived the trap, but the storm is still raging, and the maintenance crews now have to assess the cost of that violence. The immediate danger of the landing has passed, but for the maintenance crews, the work is just beginning. As Miller disappears below decks for his debrief, a team of airframers surrounds the F-18. They are looking for Code 3 damage, flight critical failure. A carrier landing is essentially a controlled crash. When a jet hits the deck with that much vertical velocity, the energy has to go somewhere. The shock absorbers take the brunt, but the stress travels up into the fuselage formers and the wing roots. The chief petty officer shines a red lens flashlight onto the landing gear struts. He is checking the witness marks, small indicators that show if the strut compressed beyond its safe limit. If the strut bottomed out, the force might have cracked the main wing spar. A cracked spar means the aircraft is grounded immediately. It becomes a $60 million paperweight until it can be craned off the ship or repaired in a depot, a process that takes months. But physical impact is not the only enemy. The storm has coated the entire air wing in a fine mist of salt water. For a modern stealth fighter like the F-35C, salt is kryptonite. The F-35 is covered in low observable coating, a secret radar-absorbing material that feels like matte rubber. Salt crystals are abrasive. They eat into the coating, creating microscopic pits. More dangerously, salt causes galvanic corrosion, where dissimilar metals meet. Aluminum skins touching steel fasteners. If left unchecked for even 24 hours, the salt will begin to fuse bolts in place and rot the airframe from the inside out. Therefore, as soon as the sea state subsides, the bird bath begins. This is not a hose down. The ship has a freshwater spray system on the flight deck, but often the wash is done by hand. Crews scrub every inch of the billion-dollar fleet. They flush the engines with fresh water to prevent salt deposits on the turbine blades, which can cause hot spots and catastrophic engine failure during the next flight. This is the hidden cost of carrier operations. A single night in a heavy storm generates hundreds of man-hours of maintenance. Every chain that was snapped taut has to be inspected for stretching. Every tire that skidded sideways has to be checked for flat spots. The crew works with a terrifying awareness of the alternative. They all know the horror stories. They know about the incident in 1954 on the USS Bennington, or the videos from the 1980s where an F-14 Tomcat broke its chains in a gale. A loose jet on a pitching deck is a wrecking ball. It slides unpredictably, crushing legs and smashing into other aircraft, turning a neatly parked flight line into a burning pile of scrap metal within seconds. Tonight on the Ford, the chains held. The cost was high in fatigue and stress, but the air wing is intact. The true value of this struggle becomes apparent the next morning. As the low-pressure system moves northeast, dissipating into the Arctic, the sun breaks over a calming sea. The flight deck is dry. The chains are stripped back to the standard 6-point configuration. The engines of the F-35s and Super Hornets are already turning, whining as they run through pre-flight checks. This is the strategic dividend of the ordeal. If this air wing had been based on land, say, at a forward operating base in the Pacific or a NATO airfield in Northern Europe, it would be a fixed target. An enemy could crater the runways with ballistic missiles or saturate the hangars with drone swarms. A land base cannot move. It must absorb the blow or die. But the carrier is different. By riding out the storm, the Ford has not just survived. It has relocated. While the adversary's satellites were blinded by the cloud cover, the ship moved 400 miles to the east. It is now in a new launch position, undetected and fully operational. The storm that grounded the enemy's air force became the carrier's cloak of invisibility. This capability is the result of decades of institutional trauma and engineering evolution. The U.S. Navy has learned these lessons in blood. From the loss of 3 destroyers in Typhoon Cobra during World War II to the modern mishaps that rewrote the NATOP's safety manuals, every chain link and every procedure on that deck is written in the ink of past disasters. Modern technology aids the fight. Supercomputers now model wave patterns days in advance. And the SPY-6 radar can track weather fronts as accurately as it tracks incoming missiles. But the machine is not autonomous. It still relies on the seamanship of the bridge crew to steer the hull and the brute strength of the deck crew to lash the billion-dollar assets to the steel. The billion-dollar jets survived not because of their stealth coating or their advanced avionics. They survived because a 19-year-old from Kansas tightened a turnbuckle in the freezing rain until his knuckles bled, ensuring that when the ocean tried to claim the aircraft, the ship wouldn't let go. From 50,000 feet, where the satellites watch, the carrier strike group is just a collection of white wakes scarring the dark blue of the Atlantic. The storm has passed, and the ocean has returned to its deceptive slumber. The waves that threatened to swallow the flight deck are now just gentle swells, rhythmic and indifferent. There is a profound arrogance in the concept of an aircraft carrier. To build a steel island, power it with the atom, and sail it into the heart of a hurricane is an act of supreme defiance against the natural order. We place the most expensive, delicate, and lethal machines ever built onto the most unstable surface on Earth. We expect them to work, and miraculously, they do. But this miracle is not guaranteed by the sticker price of the jets or the gigabytes of data flowing through the ship's servers. The survival of the air wing is a testament to something far older and more primitive than stealth technology. It is a victory of seamanship. It is the result of 1,000 small, unglamorous decisions. The quality of a weld on a pad eye, the torque on a turnbuckle, the friction of a tire on non-skid. The F-35C Lightning II is a marvel of the digital age, a computer that happens to fly. Yet, when the barometer drops and the horizon vanishes, its survival depends entirely on a 12-pound steel chain and the exhausted 19-year-old who secures it. The technology allows the ship to fight the enemy. The crew allows the ship to fight the ocean. As the first flight of the morning launches, a Super Hornet Screaming off the catapult, leaving a trail of steam that dissipates instantly in the salt air, the ship continues its patrol. It is a floating city that never sleeps, forever balancing on the knife edge between the violence of war and the violence of the sea. The ocean does not care about our budgets, our borders, or our billions. It only respects one thing: the discipline to hold fast when the world starts to roll.